wrote an article yesterday in which he mentions just some of the things that make me a libertarian without even trying to be one. That's nice. D-Roy wrote, Donald J. Trump will address the Libertarian Party and its national convention on Saturday. The Libertarian Party should nominate Trump for President of the United States. Whoa. That's nice. That's nice. Only if you want to win. Only if you want to win. Maybe you don't want to win. Maybe you don't want to win.
That's nice. Isn't that nice? What D-Roy said about me. Left Reckoning 171, Texas GOP Madness, Turf War, and Hope for Assange with Liza Featherstone and Chip Gibbons. Hello, David.
How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing well. And, I got to say, with respect to Dave from Jamaica, I don't mean to contradict the chat so early into the show, but I think Trump loved that. I think he likes a hostile room. Yeah. I think he enjoys the ability to say, like, you're a loser. You should be happy I'm here, frankly. Is so funny. Yeah, that's Trump there, who, by the way, I just want to, keep people up to where we are just policy-wise. Trump also told a group of Zionist donors that he will set the Palestinian movement back 25 years if he becomes elected president. So he is appealing to libertarians and not to any sort of split that he, is keeping an eye on in the Democratic Party. But, that's Trump at the Libertarian Convention over the weekend. And they booed him a lot. I don't know who wins. It was funny, though. I admit seeing him say, hey, a lot of these he said, she said accusations. Well, I'm going to defend you from those. Who else is going to be on your side about that?
I mean, probably not many folks. I mean, the Libertarian Party of the United States of America going through a bit of a decline. We'll be talking a little bit about that, I think, in the post game. But some strange times in a party that's not really been known for being particularly normal.
It's crazy that, and also Trump being there shows this is a close election. Like he wouldn't be doing that if he didn't think that it would be worthwhile to him. So it's just interesting to see comic. What is that guy? Comic Dave Smith.
Oh yeah.
Say, hey, this is the future. This is the former president of the United States, guys. Let's behave ourselves. Let's not be like college kids. And use this as an opportunity to send a message about a powerful person that's using us as a propaganda object for himself.
Ooh, man.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe the college kids had a fucking point.
You have more self-respect in the Libertarian Party. That's for itself. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, but let's. I guess we don't get too sidetracked by libertarians because we have other party business.
Oh my lord! Yes, sir. And just a little bit, we're going to be joined by Chip Gibbons to talk about the Assange trial and give us an update there. Some pretty good news. And after that, Liza Featherstone, turned Left Reckoning guest, Matt and I are both big fans of her writing, is joining us to talk about the turf wars. And no. Not TERF, but artificial turf, and why you got to protect those public goods, lest you empower the Republican Party. But before we get to hypotheticals, right here in Texas, over the weekend, we had the GOP, the Texas GOP convention, and it was pretty much what you expect from these. I mean, this has been a gathering that is like fodder for writing for pieces in the Daily Beast or on MSNBC, and rightfully so. It really is a madhouse, and we can talk a little bit about the structural reasons why the Republican Party in Texas has just gone so far off the rails. But just to set the scene for folks, Kyle Rittenhouse had a meet and greet. The John Birch Society has returned, and they actually had a booth at the convention. Republican log cabin, the log cabin Republicans, not allowed to show up. They had to hold events outside of the official convention space.
What did maybe it's just a topic for a different day. What did they say? Like, I always just
Oh,
think like
this has been
they're
a
so
couple years
shameless
now.
people.
No, I mean it's been a couple sessions now where they're not allowing them. They're just not interested in playing this game anymore. I mean, this is a Republican Party that has that lists homosexuality as a quote abnormal lifestyle choice. Which, by the way, got reaffirmed this year.
But I mean, what do the log cabin Republicans
Oh
say?
yeah, what did they want? Times are good,
Uh,
making some money.
I guess, yeah, lower taxes, guys. That's crazy.
Pardoning convicted murderers and spitting on the very concept of Second Amendment rights for folks here. I mean, no, truly. I mean, it's a party that is um, gotten even more extreme. Interestingly enough, important figures like John Cornyn, not very much respected at these kind of events. More and more, this fringe of the Republican Party that has come to dominate is becoming the most influential part of the Republican Party. A very small sliver of it, very active sliver, is basically taking the reins. And we could talk about all of the kind of decisions and things that are going on within this primary. Sorry, within this convention map. But maybe just to give you a window into the kind of dysfunction and infighting that's going on within the Republican Party of Texas. I'll only play this. So this is from the Rules Convention, and this is hours and hours and hours of debate on things like whether or not they should call homosexuality an abnormal lifestyle choice, a war on in vitro fertilization, which we'll get into a little bit later. Um, but this section here, I really think, is a very interesting and peculiar window into the right wing reactionary mind here, because a seemingly unoffensive, unimportant part of the rules spurs a debate that goes on for literally half an hour. Listeners, I watched this thing. I cannot tell you how surprised I was at how much discourse and debate this particular question brought up. Let me play this a little bit here to set it up for folks.
Mike 3.
Wendy Carr, SD5. I'm in favor of this amendment. Like other people have said, in the day and age of DEI, that's what this is. We should be choosing the best candidates regardless of race. I'm a woman. I know what it means to be a woman. And if you have two women that are the best candidates, great. But if you don't, then you need to choose the two best candidates.
We do. Mike 4 is the last against.
All right, so we'll go right back to this in a second. But for people who aren't following or can't see this up here, this is rule number 41, which is just a gender parity rule, saying that executive chairs there needs to be gender parity, a man and woman, on them. Which is other folks, will argue in this thing, and we won't play all the arguments here. That's statute, so you have to do that. So there's a long debate about DEI because, doesn't it sound a little bit, if you're saying that both men and women need to have equal representation, that sounds a little bit like DEI, doesn't it, Matt?
Yes, it does. I think from their perspective, this is not surprising.
But this conversation tree is about to grow some beautiful branches because, again, there's 30 minutes of debate on this question. And let's hear this response here.
Hi, Crystal Cloud, SD24 in Williamson County. I am against this. One, it is state
Against striking man and women, just to be clear.
law. Two, yes, we are male and female. I'm not in a DEI. That's wrong. But we are created differently on purpose by God. As a female, I help you as a male. And as a male, you help me as a female. We work together as a team.
Yes.
I am against this. Please vote against.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so The attempt here to strike man and women fails. And by the way, just to be clear, folks, I've cut these up. This is like out of 40 minutes of debate, and there's a lot of these. I just picked some examples that sort of help make this point here. So again, a very simple rule here. There's been around for a while. Just parity, gender parity, strikes a whole conversation about DEI. But then some people start getting very worried about man and woman, because that brings up another question that is very dear to the hearts of these Texas Republicans. So here's an amendment on this subject. And again, I just have to reiterate this debate went on for like 40 minutes.
Name and SD.
Oh, Jimmy Lee Brown, SD 3.
Okay. You can make your argument now.
I believe that the word biological could be played with by trans people, saying, I am now presently biologically a man or a woman. And that's opening it up to too much debate.
Thank you.
So again, and
Please,
if you're listening,
please.
and if you're listening to this too, and there's been at this point in the show, right? In this point in the convention, there have been multiple attempts to come up with what kind of terminology they want to use before man and women. The attempt to get rid of man and women fails, but then there's all these attempts. So first, people are doing natural, all these other kind of things, right? And they're like, that doesn't work. So
Wait, hold on. Sorry. We're told it's so easy, actually.
well,
that actually is very simple to do this. So why couldn't it be done in like one try?
Well, this, they have to try many different things. And this one here, I have to say, is probably one of my favorites, which is assigned by the creator at birth.
Right, because you can't just say what is the generic description now, like assigned at birth, right? Is it something like that?
Yeah.
Right, but you have to put the fucking Jesus stuff in there too.
And anyways, this is the response that we get from on this.
Please quiet your conversation so we can hear. Mike 4.
Hello, I'm David Garrison. You just heard from me. I am from Senate District 29, and I believe that if we cede the word woman and the word biological to the Democrats and say, we as a Republican Party don't know what these words mean, so we have to go deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole into what nonsense they're saying. We, as the Republican Party, define these words. We, as the Republican Party, are saying woman. And when we say woman, we mean a woman. And everyone in this room knows what I mean when I say woman. And everyone knows what I mean when I say man. No one here needs to dilly-dally down into the daisies about whose nonsense we need to listen to.
Well, the funny thing about this is after all of this debate, right, and I believe debate around this was around 30 minutes. After all this debate, they just ended up keeping the original rule. So talking about dilly-dallying in the daisies or all these kind of things, the Republican Party of Texas found a way to have heated discussions. The Declaration of Independence was cited. All these new kinds of neologisms, new words were invented just to return back to the same old, same old.
So just to give folks maybe don't live in America the context for what Texas is. Texas is what the second most electoral college votes of a country that, I mean, among other things, has given Israel $350 billion since after my grandparents were born. And yeah, this is what we're doing. We're dilly-dallying. We are dilly-dallying, folks, in the goddamn daisies.
And again, there's a lot in there that was pretty incredible, and it's interesting just to see. I mean, I was talking to some friends about this, how people who get really negatively obsessed with other people's human rights end up getting like really worked up by kind of seemingly baffling things like this. So there's a lot of heavy-minded debate at the Texas GOP convention over the weekend. But I mean, and a lot of the focus of the reporting is going to be about these kind of bizarre things. There was plenty of attacks on gay people, on trans people, on trans children. A lot of nastiness there. Don't mean to downplay that at all. But there's some really really worrying things too for questions like democracy. So uh, part of the charter for the GOP here that was voted on included creating a system that was effectively close to the electoral college, except that it uses counties instead of states, meaning that the sorry, the blueprint is to have Texas state level elections be run like the Electoral College. So counties get a vote instead of the people who live in them getting a vote, meaning that the millions of
Insane.
people who live in Harris County, people who live in Dallas, people who live in Austin, etc., could have their votes effectively canceled out by counties. There's counties in Texas, 70 people in them. So an attempt to limit and curtail democracy, but also to limit and curtail democracy within the Republican Party of Texas itself. And that's the thing that's really interesting here. So there's attempts to do things like limit primary voting, make it harder to vote in the Republican Party primary, because too many demon rats or Democrats, as some folks might know them, have been apparently voting in the Republican Party, right? Just kind of nonsensical stuff like that, which does tend to matter when you effectively have one party rule in this state. Another thing is that they want to make it so that getting censured by the state party means that you cannot run as a Republican for 2 years. Now, why would they want to do that? Why that's something that David Grisham's worried about? Well, as you see, the document that they've put forward for the rules and the platform of the Republican Party of the state of Texas is complete bonkers. Is completely bonkers, right? It's not even reflective of the average Republican. This was one of the lowest attended Texas GOP conventions in recent memory, and it's part of that is reflective of the fact that the Republican Party has effectively been taken over by a handful of high-powered donors and extreme activists who, like a dog chasing after a tennis ball, can get distracted for 30 minutes on the question of whether or not having gender parity for some state roles in the party is DEI, right? There has been, people use the term civil war in the Republican Party. There's a side that's won at this point. Interestingly enough, it's not clear. While like the state apparatus, the apparatus of the Republican Party, like the chairman positions and things like that, are very much held by a select few. Not the rest of the Republicans in Texas are been falling in line. So going back to this question of censure, means that if a Republican doesn't go with, let's say, the positions on in vitro fertilization that are being put forward by the activists in the Republican Party, that those people could not run again as a Republican in the next election, effectively, blocking them from running in the first place. Why is that a problem? Well, it means that those primaries that are supposed to be where Texans are able to influence politics, to select what kind of politicians are, getting what position, could be just null and void, so that this party elite can make decisions for the Republican Party of Texas. This is a political party that has been highly damaging to all sorts of people in the state of Texas. Continues to go further and further and further to the right, to wage war on itself. And I would love it if people can give us, if folks can give us any updates on these elections that are happening here today while we're live. Definitely send those in the Discord so we can talk about them in the post game. But look, I mean, this is a party that's been at war with itself, and it's not even reflective of the average political positions of Republicans in the state of Texas. And it's something that just scares the hell out of me. When you see a party that is basically able to win no matter what, because the Democratic Party has been sitting on their ass my entire life and is completely ineffective and weak.
And
But
had a position of power, frankly, like in the years before we were born,
mhm.
even statewide, like, yeah, it just withered.
It really, I think people don't realize, how strong the Democratic Party was in Texas and how quickly that power was sort of how quickly that power dissipated, and how weak and ineffective it is now. Looking at people like Colin Allred, who we've talked about on this program, who's going to raise a lot of money and get their butt kicked by Ted Cruz, a politician who's just so unbelievably unpopular. But look, even on questions of abortion, on gun rights, on all these kind of things, you're seeing laws getting passed in the Texas state legislature that aren't even reflective of its Republican base. And when you see actions like this to limit party democracy, even amongst Republicans, right? Forget the rest of us. You are seeing a very, very dangerous anti-democratic movement secure power and take hold. And it's something that the response to needs to be a lot stronger and a lot more intelligent than whatever the Beto O'Rourke campaign was and whatever the Colin Allred campaign will be, because the stakes are too damn high. And as much fun as it is to listen to folks debate about assigned by the creator at birth, I would prefer very much if the opinions of these kind of antisocial freaks had a lot less influence on my family and my friends' life.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, folks, we're going to jump over to our conversation with Chip. Is that where we're going first?
Yep.
All right. We're going to be talking to our friend Chip Gibbons on the Julian Assange case, which has a very exciting new update here. It's always wonderful talking with Chip. Make sure that you stick around after that for a conversation with Liza. And don't forget, right after that, postgame, patreon.com/leftreckoning. Get access to it. Matt and I have some really fun updates for the Libertarian Party convention, some Cybertruck videos, and much, much more. Get access to that patreon.com/leftreckoning. But enjoy this conversation with Chip first. Welcome back, Left Reckoners. Honored, as always, to be joined by our friend Chip Gibbons, who is Policy Director at Defending Rights and Dissent, and also an excellent journalist. And we're here to talk about the Assange trial. Chip, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me back. I'm always honored to be on Left Reckoning.
We always love hearing from you, and this is, a pretty exciting time, and I'm really looking forward to getting your analysis on it. Maybe to sort of share the news here, we have this video from Stella Assange speaking outside of the courthouse in the United Kingdom, and we'll just use this to set this conversation up here.
The judges reached the right decision. We spent a long time hearing the United States putting lipstick on a pig, but the judges did not buy it. As a family, we're relieved. As a family, we're relieved. But how long can this go on? The United States should read the situation and drop this case now. Now is the moment to do it.
Chip, what is this decision?
Sure. So Julian Assange will be granted leave to appeal on 2 points of law. And I know what everyone is saying. Wait a moment. What was the past 5 years worth of hearings about, if not an appeal? But in February, they had a hearing. Well, let me just back up for a minute. So 5 years ago, Julian Assange was indicted for publishing information given to him by whistleblower Chelsea Manning. He faces 18 counts, 17 of which are brought under the Espionage Act, marking the first time a publisher of truthful information has been indicted under the Espionage Act. The Obama administration considered those charges. They were not friends of press freedom. They were not friends of WikiLeaks. They were not friends of people who exposed war crimes. They put a lot of people in jail for doing that. They didn't like Julian Assange, but they balked at the idea of indicting Julian Assange because of what was called the New York Times problem. The idea that any precedent set in this case could be used to prosecute the New York Times and other publications. Donald Trump comes into office. He campaigned saying, I love WikiLeaks briefly. Before then, I believe he wanted to kill Julian Assange. But briefly, he loves them when they released something about Hillary Clinton, which was newsworthy, by the way. And then his administration brings this old indictment against Julian Assange that had been sitting on the shelf for the Chelsea Manning revelations. A British court hears a bunch of evidence about the Espionage Act, about the CIA plot to kill him, about all of these different things, and they reject the bulk of the defense's arguments, including very powerful arguments about the political offense exception under international extradition law, including very powerful arguments about CIA plots to kill him, and including the idea that his free expression rights would be violated for prosecuting him for exposing war crimes. But they reject the extradition on the basis that U.S. prisons are so inhumane and Julian Assange's mental health is so fragile that it would be oppressive for him to do so. The UK, or the U.S. appeals this with UK lawyers and UK taxpayers footing the bill, and they have that decision overturned. So the defense then turned around and filed what's called a cross appeal, meaning the judge in the initial case had ruled against extraditing but rejected their press freedom and political speech arguments. They're now appealing based on that. In February, a 2-day hearing was held in the UK system. You have to get permission to appeal. A 2-day hearing was held on whether or not Julian Assange could appeal on 9 points of law. And these were the points of law that you most associate the case with: free expression, political speech, things like that, as opposed to this sort of litigation about U.S. prisons, which are horrible and like is a valid point, but you don't think of the Julian Assange case as like a prison conditions case. You think of it as the press freedom trial of our century. After this 2-day hearing, the judges rejected, in a shocking ruling, the bulk of the arguments the defense put forward, including saying that it would not violate his free expression rights under the European Convention on Human Rights to prosecute him for exposing war crimes, shockingly claiming that all but 3 of the charges against him had no nexus to political expression. That's not true. And that those 3 charges were publications that had no public interest. They also, and you're going to love this, David, told the defense they could not raise additional evidence about the CIA plot to kill Assange because they'd already heard evidence about it. They found it plausible, but if Julian Assange is extradited to the U.S., the CIA loses the reason to kill him. So just to think about this for a minute. You'd be extradited to a country that is plotting to assassinate you because the assassination has no bearing on the extradition, because if they can just put you in prison, they can, they won't kill you. And then the other shocking thing was that the U.S.-UK extradition treaty, like all of the UK's extradition treaties but one, prohibits extradition for a political offense. If you get out a law textbook, the classic political offense is espionage, which Julian Assange is indicted for. And the courts ruled that although that language was in something like 179 of 180 UK treaties, it was unenforceable by judges. So the treaties might say you can't extradite someone for a political offense, but because of the 2003 extradition law, judges could no longer block extradition based on that reasoning. It was quote-unquote unincorporated treaty language. But what they did find was that Julian Assange had 3 grounds for appeal. One was because of the lack of a death penalty assurance, and Julian Assange does not face capital charges. His lawyers argued that the U.S. could bring death penalty charges against him. I thought that was a bit of a stretch, but the prosecution said yes, that could happen, and yes, the UK is powerless to stop it, which would violate UK law. So that was brought up as a grounds for appeal. And then the other 2 grounds for appeal both came from comments like Gordon Kronberg, a very notorious U.S. prosecutor who was involved in the Samuel Arian prosecution, who was involved in prosecuting Daniel Hale. I believe when a Muslim defendant once asked to not be made to testify before a grand jury during a Muslim holiday, he accused them of Islamicizing the U.S. legal system. So real inflamed, and he has a blog, or had a blog, where he referred to the occupied West Bank as Judea and Samara. Think of all of the controversy around, from the river to the sea, a statement calling for Palestinian freedom. and here is a man who is literally not recognizing the West Bank as like existing. But I guess that's okay. I don't know what the double standard is. I thought we couldn't say from the river to the sea, David. And he said that he filed this affidavit with the courts to show what a fair legal proceeding Julian would get. And in the affidavit, he outlines all of the types of arguments his lawyers could make against the charges, including they were void for vagueness under the Fifth Amendment. And this is the prosecution. Void for vagueness under the Fifth Amendment, and they violated his First Amendment rights. And then they set out all of the things they would say in response to that. And one of the comments they made on the First Amendment was that they may argue Julian Assange as a foreign national does not have First Amendment rights, at least with respect to national defense information. So if he could not rely on the First Amendment, the court said this would violate his Article 10 free expression right, sort of similar to the First Amendment, and it would constitute discrimination on the basis of nationality. Now, the court did something quite unusual. They said the U.S. could abort the appeal if the U.S. gives assurances, and then they told the U.S. what to say. And the U.S. issued assurances on the last minute, and the hearing last week was about whether or not those assurances were sufficient. And the defense accepted the death penalty assurance. The death penalty is no longer an issue, but they rejected the U.S. assurance that Assange could seek to rely on the First Amendment. Not could rely on, could seek to rely on. And the U.S. made this, represented by British lawyers, made this bizarre argument that Julian Assange would not be prejudiced because of his nationality, but because of his citizenship. And they at one point said, and I quote, he wouldn't be prejudiced because of his nationality, but because as a matter of law, he is a foreigner. The British judges were not impressed with this, and they have rejected the assurances, which is extremely rare, right? Usually U.S. assurances in the U.S. judicial system, including in this case, are taken at face value. So they rejected them, and now there will be an appeal about those two narrow.
So just really fast, these judges that are hearing these arguments right now about this appeal, are these the same judges who have been on this case from the get-go in the UK?
They're the same judges who have been on it in February. They're not the judges who made the decision in 2021 to block extradition, and I believe other high court judges have heard the case on the last round of appeals.
Okay. So I mean, so obviously, you know, there's something to be, you know, excited about. I mean, I think the last time we spoke, you know, the feeling was that extradition was going to happen. You know, how are people feeling right now in the Assange camp?
It's really hard to get a sense. I think people are hopeful, but it is difficult to be overly optimistic because these are judges who have said it would not violate his free expression rights to put him on trial for exposing war crimes. And that you cannot bring up that the CIA tried to kill him, but they are concerned that he may not be allowed to rely on the First Amendment for them to find the First Amendment doesn't apply, right? They're not asking him to be granted First Amendment rights. They're just asking them not to block it on the basis of being an Australian national. And that is the grounds for appeal. And it's so narrow, but on the one hand, I'm torn between the idea that the judges are ready to rubber stamp this, and Gordon Kronberg has just done a terrible job, a hubristic job, and the idea that maybe they want an out to block the extradition without challenging the Espionage Act, which they have one right now.
Yeah, I mean, sorry?
They have one right now.
They have what?
They have an out for this case. They could, right, if they say he cannot be extradited because of the national discrimination problem, but not because of the prosecuting journalism problem, you still get the precedent, sort of, that you can prosecute journalists anywhere in the world, and you don't have to do the dirty work of killing Julian Assange. Right? They have a weird off-ramp right now.
Yeah, I mean, and, you know, just before we sort of look at like the U.S. side of it, I mean, you know, is there any kind of like pressure on these judges, on the legal system, on the political system within the United Kingdom about this case? Is there a kind of political question here that might be sort of motivating some of these judges to maybe consider an off ramp?
So my British friends and British colleagues feel like the British justice system is pretty nakedly political, and they feel like the judges have been pretty blatant in giving in to political pressure to allow this case to go forward. But I don't know what the current status is. I mean, Biden has said he's considering bringing the case to an end. You have people in the DOJ leaking information about potential plea deals. The Assange defense has said they've got to no serious plea offers. But I do get the sense that in the U.S., there is some division within the establishment between the political leadership who recognizes this as a loser and like the deep state, if you will, like the career FBI agents, the career national security DOJ prosecutors, the career CIA people who really want to get Julian Assange and really are pushing this forward. That's my sense, and I don't know how that divide plays out. And I think right now Biden is just kind of apathetic, and Garland are apathetic to it, which I think if you politically pressure them in this country, there is an opening to squash this.
You know, and I think it has been interesting that there's been a little bit more willingness from some figures, political figures in the United States to at least speak out about this. Something that a few years ago felt like it was all too rare to hear politicians, reference this case as a threat to free speech, as a threat to journalism or democracy at all.
I mean, Jim McGovern from Massachusetts has taken on this case. Obviously, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and Cori Bush deserve a lot of credit because they were the first people in Congress to really come out in a strong manner for this case. But you now have a more normie progressive Democrat in Jim McGovern champion this case. You had Pramila Jayapal sign on to a letter about dropping the charges against Assange. On the Republican side, you have a lot of weird, even by Republican standards, folks on it. But then you also have Thomas Massey, who is some sort of principled libertarian. I wouldn't want to talk about Social Security with him, but he's not like, Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think he does have like a principled stance here around press freedom. So you have an interesting Congress.
No. I mean, I was just going to say it's interesting, and I think that there's an aspect to this where it adds to a level of cruelty. I think how some of the members of the right will play with this trial. I don't know if you saw Donald Trump, did a little song and dance about how maybe he would consider things about Assange. I don't tend to believe it, but again, it's an interesting kind of political opening.
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump said that going into the Libertarian National Convention, which I'm just glad Libertarian Party Twitter is messier than DSA Twitter. That's my only point of view here. Say that. And there was pressure to get him to pardon by the Libertarians Snowden, Assange, and Ross something, the founder of the Silk Road. I'm not that familiar with his case. And he pledged to pardon him and appoint a political prisoners commission, but he has not made a commitment on Assange or Snowden. And it is worth remembering the Obama administration, which was terrible for press freedom, terrible for whistleblowers, chose not to indict Julian Assange, and Trump's administration did. So I'm not really optimistic the person who busted through the norm about indicting a publisher under the Espionage Act, even one who the deep state loathes, is going to pardon him.
Well, and let's not play games here either. I mean, there is a potential, and it's unbelievable to realize that there is a potential that Donald Trump returns to the White House and gets to be the president of the United States again. I really think it's a really dangerous game, and you're playing with fire to sort of encourage and assert, as the Biden administration currently is, that we should be able to take journalists and torture them for exposing American war crimes.
This is a terrible precedent to give to the Trump administration. I mean, Donald Trump would love to prosecute journalists. He did prosecute a journalist, Julian Assange. He loved prosecuting whistleblowers, and he would love to do this further. And if we give him this precedent that can be used to go against the Times, the Washington Post, the liberal mainstream media, why do we think he wouldn't use it? Why do we keep handing him weapon after weapon, whether it is continued warrantless surveillance or prosecuting journalists, while talking about the threat he is against democracy? It is really dumb and short-sighted. But the Democrats David. That's sort of what they're good at.
Well, and it's interesting to see again any space on this at all on the American side, because I mean, as you know, I'm sure very personally, and I know from doing this for a while now, anytime we cover Assange, you get endless whining about Hillary Clinton and how she should have beaten Donald Trump, and somehow that's Julian Assange's fault. But I wanted to ask you before we sort of talk about that. A little bit more about some of the political openings here. I mean, just like to be very explicit here, there seems to be a slight opening, at least on the UK side, and there's some rumblings that maybe the Biden administration portions of it are a little bit less enthusiastic as they might have been 6 months ago, even. I mean, what's next with this appeal? I mean, what are we sort of waiting for to happen? And also, could you also just add to this, like the very personal but important aspect about the fact that Julian Assange has now been just sitting in limbo for how long?
5 years in Belmarsh prison, which was preceded by 7 years in the Ecuadorian embassy, and before anyone says he was in that embassy by choice, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention declared that Julian Assange was arbitrarily detained in the embassy. People will probably remember this partially. There were allegations of sexual assault and misconduct in Sweden that were never charged. Charges were never brought, but as part of a preliminary investigation, they wanted to question Julian Assange. Julian Assange agreed to be questioned so long as Sweden guaranteed he would not be extradited to the U.S., which is a principle under international law called non-refoulement. Multiple UN special rapporteur, the special rapporteur on torture, the working group on arbitrary detention, all looked at his claim and found it valid, that he had a right to request Sweden not to turn him over to someone who would persecute him. Sweden refused to do that. We now know, or we've known for some time, Sweden wanted to drop the extradition request, but the UK prosecutors encouraged them to keep it up. They sent them an email saying, don't get cold feet. And when solutions were proposed, including interviewing Julian Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy, the UK prosecutors were like, don't do this. And there's now a request in the UK from the parliament, from members of the parliament, including John MacDonald, and Jeremy Corbyn, which is based on the journalism of the Italian investigative reporter Stefania Morici, to investigate why did the UK prosecution system overstep so greatly and encourage Sweden to continue on with this request that never results in charges and, doesn't make a lot of sense. And so he spent 7 years arbitrarily detained in the Ecuadorian embassy. He has now spent 5 years in Belmarsh prison, one of the harshest prisons in the UK that is reserved for terrorists and serial killers. I was hearing about one of his fellow prisoners who's a convicted cannibal. This is the type of person they have in prison with. And he has been he has been subjected per the UN Special Rapporteur to torture. So this is someone who's in poor health. He's clearly not doing well health-wise. It is clearly the result of his detention, and they just continue to hold him in limbo. And they won't grant him bail because they have convicted him of skipping bail because he was granted asylum in Ecuador, right? If another country grants you asylum, saying you are a political refugee, that's not bail skipping, right? It shouldn't be treated as such. So,
so what's next with the appeal?
I'm trying to get a sense of that we will get a court date later on when that will happen. So this could be another extended period of time. And if the court rules against him, there is still the chance this goes to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, France. So we could be looking at 7 years in Belmarsh. We could be looking at 8 years in Belmarsh, or we could be looking at, flying him to the Alexandria Detention Center, which is an even worse prison. I've known people who have been incarcerated there awaiting trial, and it's the conditions are even worse.
I mean, you know, it truly at this point is.
It's still a long road to Julian's freedom.
It truly is baffling to watch the the passion, I guess, that we're getting from the Biden administration in pursuing this case. You know, to our listeners out there who might not understand, you know, the stakes of this case, could you just remind folks of how, you know, this is beyond just, and this is important enough like another person's life, but this case has massive consequences and threats to just basic aspects of democracy in the United States and the world too.
So there are four layers here. Layer one is the threat to Julian Assange's life. He is a victim of torture. He's a victim of arbitrary detention. His human rights have been deprived. Problem two is we are indicting someone for exposing U.S. war crimes. We are putting someone on trial and trying to disappear them into the prison system because they showed the U.S. was committing war crimes and human rights violations. Problem three, if they succeed, this will set an unprecedented precedent in the U.S. that you can use the Espionage Act to prosecute journalists. They've used it to prosecute Chelsea Manning and Daniel Ellsberg and Daniel Hale, the whistleblowers, but they've never used it against the publisher, and the belief was that was unconstitutional. So we are criminalizing journalism. And problem four is Julian Assange is not a U.S. citizen. WikiLeaks is not a U.S. publication, and his work was not done in the U.S. We are saying the Espionage Act applies to any journalist anywhere in the world, and you can go and arrest them and bring them here. And other governments are saying, okay, if the U.S. can do that, we can too. So we are now creating a global open season to hunt journalists across borders using lawfare.
Yeah. And and we don't need to go through all the hypotheticals, but I'm telling you that I don't think that folks would be very comfortable with Iran pursuing, Iranian Americans here, nor Germany or any other country, right? And it really, truly is an exceptional power to just claim for yourself and for people to really sort of be sleepwalking about. It's a very pressing threat to basic kind of questions of internationalism and human rights and democracy.
No, it's terrible. I mean, it is the press freedom case of our century, and is not just a case that will decide the future of the First Amendment for us. It will decide the fate of press freedom globally. Like, I cannot stress the global implications enough.
No, I mean, yeah, because I think that you're absolutely correct about that. Well, folks, this is Chip Gibbons, Policy Director with Defending Rights and Dissent. Chip, it's always wonderful to speak with you. Hope that you're able to come back on the program soon with some good news here.
Hope so too. I mean, this is the best news we've had in 4 years on the Assange case. I'm sorry I was so realistic about the next step, but it is the first legal ruling in Assange's favor in 4 years. So it is worth celebrating, but we should be cautious
Truly.
about what comes next.
Well, appreciate you as always.
Thank you.
Welcome back, Left Reckoners. David here, joined as always by Matt Leck. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing good, David. Good to be with you.
Yeah, man. And we're really thrilled to be joined today by Liza Featherstone, who is a writer and columnist whose work you can find in excellent publications like Jacobin Magazine, New Republic, and The Nation. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Good to be with you, David and Matt.
Yeah, we're really excited that you're back here chatting with us. The last time we were on the program, we had a really great time, and people should definitely check out that appearance as well. But we're going to talk about something a little bit different than the crisis of masculinity this time around. We're going to talk about TERF.
Although I guess it's all related.
Well, I actually would love to know what the kind of like alpha male position on TERF is, because I could see it going in a couple different ways.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to clarify for people, we are talking about turf as in the thing on the ground and not like trans exclusionary radical feminism. Or
Right? No. Or like in canvassing, there's all,
Well, you wrote this piece in the New Republic, and I'll just share it real fast here. Called "Artificial Turf is Tearing Towns Apart. The PFAs and playing fields in the open. Question of what they might do to kids is turning into a culture war." Maybe just get us started. I mean, what was it that inspired you to tackle this subject in the first place?
So to speak. Yeah. I write a lot about environmental issues and also about the culture wars and our crumbling republic. This issue, the more I learned about it, became kind of a natural to me. My son is a very serious soccer player, so I've been standing around on these things for years. He's 18 now, but this one actually came from a reader. This suggestion, at the New Republic, I write for the vertical there called "Apocalypse Soon." We focus on the climate crisis, a resident of Rye, New York, wrote in to tell us a little bit about the controversy there over artificial turf. I'm going to just summarize the controversy in Rye, but listeners should know that this is just one example, but this exact same controversy is playing out in a lot of different places, especially in the Northeast, but I imagine probably a lot of other parts of the country as well. The Rye, New York, is a very pleasant, affluent suburb. There are Republicans because there are rich people, but then there are also liberals because it's not too far outside of a city, so it's just, there are Republicans, there are Democrats. Like a lot of other prosperous suburbs, they nonetheless haven't always maintained all their public goods. So they've got this soccer field that is grass soccer field, really beat up from years of use. They don't really maintain it very well. It floods a lot. The games have to frequently be canceled. Anybody whose kid plays soccer or has played sports themselves is probably familiar with this sad state of affairs. Obviously, there's worse things happening in the world. It's not Gaza, but it's a pain, right? And people feel upset about it. So a number of town, the kinds of guys who run sports in the town, like coaches, very active parents, decided that the town needed an artificial turf field in that spot, and they offered to raise the money, $3 million for it, and there was a lot of controversy around this because artificial turf is pretty terrible for the environment in well-documented ways. The field is right by a creek. So, these are like these microplastics get in the environment. They may not break down for 1,000 years. I learned they also are pretty terrible from a flood resiliency point of view because they won't absorb the water at all. And I mean, that's part of the reason that, that it makes them less vulnerable to game cancellations in the short run, but much more vulnerable for the whole neighborhood in terms of, in terms of flooding. They're also pretty. I chatted with some athletes about this and also read a lot of studies. They're pretty terrible in terms of vulnerable to leaving athletes very vulnerable to injuries. There's much less give on a turf field than grass. People get hurt a lot. And your athletes are also day in and day out being exposed to all these same toxins that are terrible for the environment and also terrible for us. So there's and some of the chemicals that are toxic chemicals that are found in artificial turf can cause cancer and all kinds of other extremely undesirable health effects.
I just want to jump in there quick, Liza. These forever chemicals, PFAS, as you say, like I've heard about these people. There's a movie called Dirty Waters that kind of goes into them. And, a majority report, we've had number of tort lawyers over the course of the years going into, 3M and the use of these chemicals and things like Teflon coating for pans and firefighter foam and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a huge issue for firefighters. Yeah, huge issue for firefighters. A lot of evidence of how these exact same chemicals have affected them. That I should also say that so it's not just a bunch of cranks in your town who are raising these issues. The NFL Players Union is insisting on grass fields for this exact same reason, and both men and women's U.S. soccer teams have officially declared they will only play on grass fields. So this is so the issue of player health and player injuries is really like there's a solid consensus among athletes on this subject. And so anyway, so the controversy it raged in Rye. The group that wanted the artificial turf field was so exasperated at meeting any kind of resistance that it fueled the formation of a group called the Republicans to try to unseat the city council people that they saw as resistant to this scheme. The city council meetings grew very heated. People were very disturbed because historically this is a very peaceful community, so peaceful that they had a law against an ordinance against yard signs until around 2007, when the New York Civil Liberties Union ruled that you can't actually stop people from putting up yard signs and brought suit against them. But nonetheless, so they don't have that particular ordinance anymore, but it gives you a sense of the culture of this town. It's not a town in which people really fight about politics. But this issue of the turf soccer fields from 2019 to the present has really got people angry. They went so far as to put up signs. So they're like really very upset on both sides. So that and it has also been controversial elsewhere in other places that are not as peaceful as Rye. Martha's Vineyard, people had their tires slashed, people got threats of violence. So it got pretty intense, and it shows to me. We can talk about. There's all kinds of things we could talk about the implications, but it's very interesting to me how often you see this playbook where there's something that seems like kind of a common sense issue. It makes sense for neighbors to disagree, but it's sort of a matter of the health of the environment, the health of the kids, and the far right is really able to sort of mobilize these issues and tap into the discontent people feel about the neglect of their public sphere, the neglect of public spaces, and really turn it into like a you just don't care about our kids, and kind of like just mobilize in that way, and there's just really this kind of deep well of anti-liberal, anti-science feeling even in these seemingly pretty liberal and still places.
Well, I mean, this is such an interesting issue because I will say that artificial turf is just massively unpopular. When I, sort of told Matt we were going to do this, Matt immediately let out a groan just thinking about his experience playing on turf when he was younger.
I mean, David played, minor league soccer, so you probably have more experience on this stuff than I do. But Bismarck State College put in AstroTurf in the mid 2000s, and I remember looking at it and being like, this is amazing looking, and then getting down on it and being like, this is hot, and I feel like I'm gonna roll my ankle. And I played a JV football game on there. It sucked falling. You didn't want to be hitting the ground on that because you feel the cement right underneath it. It's wild.
No, it's terrible. And you mentioned the heat. The artificial turf gets much hotter than grass. It actually gets even hotter than asphalt. So, particularly, speaking of climate change, it's really not a sensible thing to be putting in there.
But who is it that likes this? I mean, because it just is a fascinating thing that you're seeing all across the country, and it's amazing when you see these kind of one size fits all solutions, be it this or a lot of other things you see on local government. Why is it that so many localities across the country are like, all right, we're having a hard time paying groundskeepers or whatnot, I'm assuming. Let's spend a lot of money on this, technology.
Yeah, it's very strange because the common sense on the grass turf, is it's a little, the grass is much cheaper, up front. It's not that expensive over time to maintain. You do have to put some thought into what kind of grass you're planting and some conscientiousness to maintain it. But but the economics of it are fine, and the health and science of it is extremely clear cut, and so it's odd. My sense of it is that it's one of those things where people are really sensitive to the idea that these liberal environmentalists are getting in the way of our having nice things. That it's kind of like AOC is coming for your hamburgers, type of narrative. It's like you just want your kids to be able to play soccer, and these killjoy liberals are getting in the way, and it's very and it's strange to me, because to me it seems like it's so easy to turn that around, right, and be like the, you know, that no, like the left wants public goods. We want everybody to have beautiful soccer fields that are well maintained, you know, and you just you know, if you just been paying maybe a little bit more taxes and a little bit more attention all along, we wouldn't be in this situation.
Right.
But it's but the this sort of this sort of wellspring of resentment against against the liberal elite is so is just so easily tapped in that narrative practically writes itself as soon as these controversies well up.
Yeah, it should seem like the hamburger to me should be good old-fashioned grass, and like the sort of fake, like let them eat bugs sort of conspiracy should be like, oh, they're trying to take grass away, and like it seems very two-faced to me, because on the one hand it's like, oh, we want nice things, but also, do you see the money this is going to save us on the back end, not having to have a guy ride around a mower on it?
Exactly. No, exactly. It's really an austerity solution to an austerity problem, and and kind of dressed up as a culture war. You know, it's sort of like dressed up as like, oh, you know, because of the environment, people don't want you to have a soccer field. It's like, no, it's like actually, you know, they didn't spend enough money maintaining this soccer field, and now they're going to look for a super cheap solution from with funding from a non-public source, and you know, it's going to be all beat up and crap in 5 years anyway. And like that, and a whole new solution will have to be found by that time, all the PFAS will be in the kids' bodies and in the streams, you know, and like there will still be no soccer field. Like, so it's just really yeah,
and it's like, I mean, just again, not to be too focused only on the on the turf thing, but I'll tell you,
it's compelling.
It's so compelling because, you know, there's another aspect of it too that I think, you know, you're hinting at, is like there is this idea that like this is just a permanent solution, right? Okay, the turf gets installed and it's done. That's not how it works. You have to constantly buy more material to maintain it and replace it. It's a constant process. So it's not just like, oh, here's one big expense at the beginning. You know, not even talking about the environmental stuff, but just like, oh, here's one big expense at the beginning, then we don't have to touch it for another 30 years, right? No, it's like you are committing now to always having to buy this kind of material for young people to be able to play sports in your community. Yeah.
It's sort of, I mean, it's sort of interesting because this is what austerity solutions always are, right? Is they're always like passing the buck to not even the next generation, but to whoever's you know, in charge of this like 5 or 7 years from now. You know, like, and it's just, you know, it's just like, okay, well, you've just created a problem for future people, maybe even yourself in 5 or 7 years, you know, because like, you know, it's not like, you know, these people are going to be dead. I mean, it's just a really an amazing, it's amazingly ridiculous. I think something else I should mention about this particular controversy is the another dimension of it is that the state has taken some measures against PFAS, and so there is a law recently passed in New York State that outlaws PFAS in carpeting, and there is likely to be legislation in the near future that clarifies that because the carpeting thing is a little ambiguous. Is soccer field a form of carpeting? So like you could interpret it. You could imagine like years of litigation on that topic. But there is pending legislation to clarify that it is also illegal in a athletic field. And so so that means that if this field goes through, it will actually it could get caught up in issues of whether it's even legal under state law. It could also become illegal to replace it, with another turf field. I mean, it's like it's
well, that would be like throwing gasoline on this fight, though. Frankly, if the nanny state gets involved in sort of,
I know it would, but in a sense, it gives you a sense of the sort of layers of.
No, I mean, totally. Well, I mean, to try to broaden this out a little bit, really, this is something that like it could be about turf, right? But it could be about a lot of things. Is that like the state of like infrastructure and public goods in America is just awful. Yeah. And there's all of these kind of really weird, cheap, oftentimes silly, dangerous, wrong solutions to it.
Hey, Elon Musk has a tunnel he wants to sell you.
Don't get me started on that. He did that in Kyle, Texas, and got so much money for this stupid tunnel that he didn't end up building. That was supposed to be, it could have been a sidewalk. They just need a sidewalk to get people around. They're like, I'm going to build this tunnel. And he got a few $100,000 from Kyle, Texas, which, small town, you don't know, you've never heard of it before. And then of course it doesn't make any sense. So they just disappeared. Elon Musk and his boring company stopped answering emails after anyway. No, but I mean, like, anyway, we could come up with a million of these kind of stories, but like, what is it about these, that is so advantageous to the right? Because you think that this would be something that our side, especially, not even like just liberals, but like, people, Democratic Socialists, et cetera, would be really good at speaking to, but it's not the case for the most part.
Yeah. Well, I think, we see this playbook a lot. Like I think that the right got really good at it under COVID, because there was a lot of discontent with public schools being closed, like parents having no daycare. Kids having no place to learn, and just sort of a sense that like our public institutions were not there for people, and even though it was so disingenuous because the right, as we know, is the side that wants to actually take these public institutions away from you permanently, but they were nonetheless able to sort of weaponize that to be like, look, the liberals, the left, don't want your kids to be able to go to school, if your kids are depressed, having a mental health crisis because they're not in school, it's the fault of the liberals, and they were just like really able to weaponize that into a sort of culture war, but that I would argue was really we sort of, our side should have been able to more capably make the case that that we needed actually stronger public institutions to respond to this crisis, and that there was that there were better ways, especially after the first couple weeks of the crisis, like that there were better ways than keeping kids just home from school, but those would have required more public investment. And so sort of by seeding the sort of, taking the neglect of our public goods as a given, I think the liberals or the center often just let the right win the argument, which is, this anger about the public institutions and anger at the liberals. I mean, and you'll see in the same period that I would that we have had a lot of anger at public schools and libraries over just basic inclusion issues, like drag queen story hour, and stuff like that, and in in places where people are really happy with the services provided by their public institutions, it's been easier to fight those things, I think, because, where the community has more loyalty to the library, more like faith in their schools to begin with. I mean, I'm not saying you don't get any, crazy people in those communities, but the communities are more equipped to fight it, I think.
Yeah, and I think what the right has been able to do very successfully in a lot of places, actually, is kind of whip up anger and direct it to a certain direction, but it's coming from a place of people feeling like a little bit of disenfranchisement.
Yeah,
so it's like, so it's like public schools, which like, it's in the name, like they sort of belong to us. There is this kind of taking back narrative, right? We got to take these back from this outside force. And I think that obviously it's a cynical move by the right, which wants to literally take those away and privatize all the schools. Our side has to figure out a better way to make that kind of proposition just seem laughable from the get-go.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think the stronger our public goods are to begin with, the less vulnerable we are to this nonsense. I'm not saying it all goes away, because we've got a lot of nonsense in our society, but but I think that we're better equipped to defend our public sphere against this kind of nonsense when it is stronger and better invested to begin with.
Yeah. Well, one of the key asymmetries is that the Republican Party is aligned on this entirely up and down the entire party, whereas like Democrats, you see things like Chattanooga doing municipal broadband. The National Party isn't going to talk about that stuff because they're owned by tech companies. So like you can do that on a local level, but be part of the platform. Sorry, we have a deal with Uber to like chauffeur our convention guests to the front of the line. Like we're not actually going to elaborate that. So it's inert.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's a great example. Yeah.
And, I'll just say this too, is that even in unfavorable political conditions too, supporting these public goods can pay dividends. I mean, a really great example of that is right here in Texas, where we have had Republican control of the state pretty much my entire life, right? 2 years before the Republicans completely controlled the state. And they're trying to do school privatization. They're trying to do voucher things. And what ended up happening? Well, rural Republicans got together and said, don't touch our schools. Our schools are too important to our community. They'll vote Republican, right? But, that's a very powerful and important thing, that the work of 100 years in Texas of, public schools being important to the community, both socially, culturally, and certainly educationally, that paid dividends in making sure that we're able to enjoy that public good today and not having it torn apart from us.
Yeah, and that's a really great point. And I would say something that's kind of interesting is that they actually lose a lot. And like we sort of lose track of that because we get so alarmed in the situations when they win. But right wing school board elections, like efforts to take over school boards, those kinds of county level elections, like they the far right loses a lot, and I think that's right, David, to your point, where like where people are really invested in their public institution, maybe like where it's where people feel confident that these right wingers have, to say the least, nothing to add. They're less likely to get a toehold.
Well, I really do appreciate you coming on and speaking with us. And the next time y'all see, a new turf field in your community, you'll know how to orient yourself around it. Liza, really, it's always such a pleasure speaking with you. We'll have links below to your work and your Twitter. Is there anything else that people should be keeping their eye out for?
You mean in terms of the of this kind of issue?
No. For people to follow you and keep up with your work.
Oh yeah, sure. The main mainly right now, as you mentioned, I write a column for Gibbon, so I'm in there every other week, and then also for the New Republic, and so I'm in there every other week as well. So those are the main things at the moment.
Well, everyone, y'all know what to do. Liza, thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Man,
Speaking of, there we go. Speaking of knowing what to do, folks, you know what to do, which is go to patreon.com/leftreckoning and support our asses. And you get the post game every Tuesday night right after the show, and also the Sunday show, which we had a spicy one with Dino Gastella this week. Good discussion. We can check that out for you. I was
definitely check out the Dino episode. We talk about harm reduction and drug policy, and get into some stuff. Start talking about some very popular ideas on the left and the liberal left, and why they might not be working for everyday folks. So you want to listen?
You know what I wish I brought up in that was gambling. I'm pretty anti-gambling. Also.
I'll tell you what. I mean, I think you mentioned Bhaskar, though. Bhaskar's been sort of touching on these things, from the gambling to the illegal pot shops in New York. Some of these things. I mean, gambling. I mean, it's horrifying, and I'm sure you have been experiencing this a lot as a NBA guy.
Yeah, I mean, already, it's going to. So Jonte Porter, people know that he got Michael Porter Jr.'s brother busted for giving his Discord hints on when he was going to be injured and stuff like that in games. But that is inevitable, right? Like, this stuff is inevitable. It didn't like the Black Sox when that happened 100 years ago. That wasn't because of like some moral failing. Like, you cannot introduce this stuff in this type of society with this sort of like a desperation, because guess what? Not every one of these players is set for life. Actually, some of them actually have to sweat. How am I going to pay for all this stuff if I say get an injury or something like that? Like, this stuff, Bradley Beal, and also that's just to say like the cheating, not to mention what it does to the actual fans. And I mean, just the crossover there. Bradley Beal, when he played for the Wizards, had to get like had some crazy altercation with a fan who was like, "You cost me money." The type of stuff, the type of stake people are putting up for this stuff is going to lead people to do desperate shit to people that they could just walk onto the court. Like, I just really think people need to. I mean, we're through the looking glass, as they say. Like, and I think it's really not going to have a soft landing. I think the Jonte Porter thing is just the beginning, but
and not to mention the devastation it causes working people who get sucked into these things.
Exactly. I didn't even get to that, but that's the most important wide part. And it's like every one of these podcasts has to have like a 45-second disclaimer on every ad that they say for this stuff. And it's like, like all these hotlines, maybe there's an actual problem here.
Yeah. No, Matt, isn't it good? These rich assholes are preying on everyday folks, but they're paying for a gambling hotline you can call if you get into trouble. If you get into debt
it's
to
like
them,
crypto.
They'll talk you through it. Yeah. 100%.
They're looking for dumb money. This is like when you start doing the Matt Damon, Spike Lee ads for everyone. You're looking for dumb money to enter the system, because gambling one is just the degenerates that like. And I'm being a little bit inflammatory with that language, but gamblers know what I'm talking about, right? When you have to go seek this stuff out, whether you have to go, whether it's to Vegas or whether it's very circumscribed, for instance, not on the jerseys of the goddamn teams, like, right? Like, when, like, that's a different audience than when you're pushing for everyone widely. Join in. It's just like fantasy football. Here, we'll even give you some money in on it to play with, get you started, get your beak wet a little bit. It's sick. It's really sick.
Well, that, we talked about some of those other kind of left libertarian ideas. And speaking of libertarians, we're going to be talking about them in the postgame. Patreon.com/leftreckoning to get access to it. They're going through quite a transformation. You won't want to miss it. We also got some Cybertruck vids, more good stuff. All that over the postgame. Patreon.com/leftreckoning to support us. Thank you very much for hanging out with us. And we'll be over there in about 5-10 minutes. See you soon.
Peace.